Well, the Eagles didn't just win the Super Bowl. They crushed the Chiefs 40-22 in Super Bowl 59. I know the final score doesn't really show that. Jalen Hurts coming back with one goal in this Super Bowl. Take what's his, and that he did. But every offseason, you got to take a moment, reflect on the previous season. Then it's time to get to work. So free agency, the draft, trades, new coaches, always trying to improve. Looking at the odds to win next year's Super Bowl, it's the Eagles that are the early favorites at plus 600, looking to repeat there. Then the Chiefs right behind them at plus 650 odds. The NFC East currently the only division in the league in which all four current teams have won not only one Super Bowl, but at least two. With 14 Super Bowl titles, the NFC East currently the most successful division in the NFL during the Super Bowl era. The AFC West is second with 10 titles. NFL writers Tyler Sullivan and John Breech joining us now on HQ, looking at the offseason needs for these NFC East teams. We're going to start with the championship Eagles. John, some of the key free agents that are out there, who should they look to target or resign? What's the move there for the Eagles?
Well, Jenny, first, Howie Roseman has to get out of concussion protocol. We all saw him take a beer can to the head during that parade. Hey, he looked the happiest I've ever seen someone who got hit in the head with a beer can, so absolutely. But once he does, I think one of the key things that he's going to have to start doing is figure out how to kind of restock this defense. We saw this defense absolutely destroy Patrick Mahomes and that Chiefs offense during the Super Bowl. And one reason the Eagles were so successful this year is because Howie Roseman got some bargains for the 2024 season. When you look at Zach Bond, when you look at Josh Sweat, when you look at Milton Williams, those three guys, that was three of their top 5 sack guys during the season. Well, all three of them were under contract for under $18 million total during the 2024 season. So that is an absolute bargain. You have to figure out if you're going to re-sign Zach Bond, how much money you might be willing to give him. Josh Sweat was your top sack guy, led the team in sacks during the Super Bowl. He's probably going to end up testing free agency. And then obviously Williams, once again, another one who's going to be testing free agency. And then you look further down. There are a couple key guys. Mekhi Becton played a huge role at guard during the regular season into the Super Bowl. A huge surprise that he played so well. So he's going to be someone who you have to think about re-signing. And then you look at kind of the key guys who weren't necessarily starters every week, the guys like Avonte Maddox, Kenneth Gainwell, Oren Burks. So you have a few players, kind of the niche role players that you have to think about re-signing. So the Eagles have a lot to figure out over the next few weeks. But Howie Roseman has been so good at his job over the past few years. I don't think anyone in Philadelphia is concerned right now.
The best part after he took that beer can to the head when he was like, I bleed for this city, just so fired up. It's great to see. They did lose their offensive coordinator, though, Kellen Moore, new head coach of the New Orleans Saints. They're in the early process of replacing him. What are some names that you're hearing out there, Tyler?
Yeah, I think the easiest one that you look at is in-house, and it's Kevin Patullo. He's been their passing game coordinator, associate head coach. He's been with Nick Sirianni going back to their days with the Indianapolis Colts. So that really probably makes the most sense. But what's interesting about all of this, and another name is Doug Nussmeier. He's someone that you can kind of pay attention to as well, quarterbacks coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. But what's interesting about all of this is that Kellen Moore is now going to New Orleans, and he has to fill out a staff. So all of these candidates that we're going to be talking about, whether it's Patullo or Nussmeier, you go down the list, they're also going to be a candidate for the New Orleans Saints as well. Now, we all assume that the Philadelphia Eagles are a much better job, much more attractive job at offensive coordinator, considering they just won the Super Bowl. You have Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, an unbelievable offensive line, the receivers, and all of that. But it is a little interesting to see if all of a sudden Kellen Moore is going to be poaching some of these other coaches off of Sirianni's staff.
It's kind of what they do, isn't it? All right, Tyler, we're going to stick with you here, but switching over to the Commanders. Now, they took America by storm this season, all kind of rooting for the underdog. Jaden Daniels out there surpassed all expectations. We're going to get to him a little bit later. But where can you see them improving among free agency?
Yeah, they are the team that I'm the most excited to watch this offseason because of Jaden Daniels, because they have the third most cap space in the NFL. And what we saw from Jaden Daniels in his rookie season, that's only going to make Washington a destination. People are going to want to go play around Jaden Daniels. He had that type of aura. So when we start talking about these free agents like Bobby Wagner, like Jeremy Chin, like Zach Ertz, I don't really have a lot of concern about them retaining these types of players. You saw Zach Ertz in that NFC Championship championship, was playing really well down the stretch for them, a real go-to target for Jaden Daniels. And I can't imagine that Zach Ertz doesn't want to continue playing with a guy like Jaden Daniels. So retaining their in-house guys, not that worried about. Now, for me, the one thing that I want to see them do is continue to make a big splash, not just bringing in and retaining your guys, but see if you can bring in another high-caliber wide receiver to pair with Terry McLaurin. Let's see if they get into the sweepstakes of Myles Garrett to add another pass rusher to that defense. They have the money to extend him as well. So to me, all options are on the table for the Washington Commanders, given that they have a young rookie quarterback and a ton of cap space.
You mentioned the cap space there, and going back to Jaden Daniels, John, you would imagine the Commanders are in a prime position to kind of just go all in on him, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where you take the crowbar and you pry open the Super Bowl window, because this is it. If you're the Commanders, there aren't many teams out there that have a quarterback as talented as Jaden Daniels for such a low contract number. And you don't have to worry about extending him at all for at least 2 seasons. That means you get 2 full years under your belt where you got to bring in anyone and everyone you can to make this team better. Tyler mentioned possibly bringing in a wide receiver. Maybe this is where you go out and get someone like T. Higgins if he becomes available. Maybe you call up the 49ers and try and swing a trade for Deebo Samuel. But the point is, you have Terry McLaurin, you have Jaden Daniels. Why not add someone else to that? Get that number 2 guy and make that offense better. And trying to hit a home run on the defensive side of the ball, trying to get Myles Garrett, trying to swing a trade for Max Crosby. Those would both be very smart moves, because that's another spot where the Commanders absolutely kind of need to step up what they have. So better wide receiver, get more pass rush. And you know what? Jaden Daniels got sacked 47 times during the 2024 season. He got hit a lot. So maybe you try and beef up the offensive line, maybe go out and sign a tackle in free agency. I'm sure Jaden Daniels would appreciate that. But the bottom line is that money should not be a cost. You have the cap space. You have the superstar quarterback. Now you just need to build around him and take advantage of this 2-year Super Bowl window where you don't have to worry about paying him.
As Tyler mentioned, a fun team to watch this offseason and see how it all plays out. All right, how about them Cowboys? John, as a wife of a Cowboys fan, who can they require just to make my life easier and better? Please help.
Jenny, help is tell your husband he needs a new team. That is the first help there. Okay. Well, if that is not an option, this is really an interesting offseason for the Cowboys. Because remember, last year, all we were talking about was Jerry Jones saying, well, this is all in. We're going all in this year. Well, now I understand why he was saying that, because all of these contracts are expiring. They just expired after the 2024 season. So they have a lot of work cut out for them. You look at guys that are probably going to leave, Brandon Cooks, Rico Dowdle. You look at on the defensive side of the ball, Eric Kendricks, Carl Lawson, Jordan Lewis, Chauncey Golston, Osa Odighizuwa. You just have this whole list of guys who are probably not going to be re-signing. And so of the defensive guys, that's guys at every single level, not just defensive tackles, linebackers, guys in the secondary. So the Cowboys are going to have a lot of rebuilding to do. And when you're in a division with 2 teams that just played in the NFC Championship game, you have to deal with the Commanders. You have to deal with the Eagles. So, Jenny, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of good news right now, because this team has a lot of question marks heading into free agency, and they don't have a lot of salary cap space to fill those holes. So it's not like Jerry Jones can go out there and go on a spending spree, even if he wanted to. So a lot of this is going to have to be done through the draft and kind of through in-house re-signing. So the Cowboys are not in great shape going into this offseason.
That's not what I wanted to hear, but okay. We're going to finish this off with the New York Giants, another team that needs some help. Tyler, it seems like the biggest need still remains at quarterback there. That's kind of a big deal. How do they fix that?
Yeah, and I'm a little concerned about the New York Giants in their hunt for a new quarterback, because we all talk like, oh, okay, well, they really like Shedeur Sanders. It's a clear fit. They don't have the number 1 overall pick, folks. Like, they have the number 3 overall selection. And as much as we hear about the Tennessee Titans saying that they're not going to pass on a generational type of talent, we all point to possibly that being Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, or you say even for Abdul Carter with the Cleveland Browns at number 2 overall to help replace Myles Garrett. Both of those teams need a quarterback quarterback. I just feel like that is so getting overlooked that, of course, yes, you'd like to fill other positions on your roster, but when you have such a gaping hole at quarterback like the Tennessee Titans and Cleveland Browns do, we can't rule out the fact that there might not be a quarterback for the New York Giants to take at number 3. And so now you're talking about what does it look like on the free agent market, which comes first on this offseason calendar. Do you start to look at the Sam Darnolds of the world? Do you go down that route? Or do you start going down the trade path? Is the Matthew Stafford connection with his brother-in-law now on staff, is that something that you pursue? It just seems like there's a lot of options, but in terms of the avenues to get there, it's going to be really tricky for New York to thread the needle.
A lot of options and a lot of questions. John, Tyler, thank you so much for breaking down some of the needs in the NFC East this offseason. We appreciate you here on HQ. There is no offseason in the NFL. We have you covered here on CBS Sports HQ News Analysis and all you need to know in the world of football. You can find us streaming 24/7, so you are always in the know. Welcome back to HQ. Buffalo's Josh Allen earned his first MVP award earlier this month, beating Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson in a nice tight race there. Jackson topped Allen for first-team All-Pro honors just a few weeks before, but the Bills quarterback flipped enough votes to take home that MVP award. Now, not every team has won a Super Bowl. The Bills and the Vikings are tied for the most Super Bowl appearances without an actual victory. But when it comes to that AFC East title, take a look right here. The Bills with 15 of it. The only team that has more, those New England Patriots.
I love how the Colts still have more AFC East titles than the Jets, even though they haven't been in that division.
Wow.
The disrespect is real.
The disrespect is so real. Jenny Dell, Chris Hassel, Elijah Duzabal here to break down the offseason needs with no disrespect to the AFC East. And we're going to start with the Bills. So it seems like their focus will be putting a little bit more oomph around their MVP and Josh Allen. So what can the Bills do this offseason to kind of get things going?
First and foremost, Gina, I think it's going to start on the defensive side of the ball.
Okay.
2 years ago, they brought in Von Miller to essentially be their closer after losing a game where they were up 13 seconds against the Kansas City Chiefs in a divisional round. Now, he looked really good that year, the first year, but then he ends up tearing his ACL, and he just hasn't looked the same. So they're probably going to have to rework his contract and maybe even be a cap casualty as well. Also, they're going to have to restructure Deion Dawkins and Josh Allen. But what about this one? Trade for Myles Garrett, right? He seems like he wants to get out of Cleveland. Now, again, he's the face of the franchise. Don't know if Cleveland will really entertain a package to trade for him, but they can restructure and get enough money to not only trade for Myles Garrett, but also extend him. And you see what Myles Garrett has done, right? First in TFLs last year, first in pressures, second in the NFL in sacks. And the crazy thing is, JD and Haas, people were saying this was a down year for him, and he was second in the NFL in sacks. So they need that game-time closer that can close out games against the Kansas City Chiefs, against the Baltimore Ravens. I think getting Myles Garrett will go a long way, and the Bills maybe finally getting over the hump to get a Super Bowl.
How about when you look at their pending free agents, and you see guys like Cooper and Hollins, both wide receivers, and we know how thin they were at wide receiver going into the season, made that trade for Cooper.
To me, guys that they've drafted the last couple of years have to step up. Dalton Kincaid was supposed to be a guy. I know Pete raved about him throughout training camp and saying that he was going to be a guy that maybe catches 100 passes. That didn't happen. Another guy, Keon Coleman, that they drafted in the second round, he has to step up as well. They're going to be led by their offensive line in the run game. James Cook is a Pro Bowl player, and that's something that they need to look at as well, because they may need to extend him from what he's done over the last 3 years there.
A lot of money.
Exactly. I mean, but rightfully so, right? He tied for the league in rushing touchdowns last year, back-to-back 1,000-yard receiver, back-to-back Pro Bowl running back. So he's a player not only in the run game, but in the pass game that they use a lot as well. So when you look at what Josh Allen, maybe they need one more receiver to pair with Curtis Samuel and also Khalil Shakir. But the young players that they've drafted the last 2 years, more specifically in the second round, they need to step up.
All right, let's move to your New York Jets.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of stuff going on here. New management, new head coach. Going to need a new quarterback now that they say Rodgers isn't coming back.
Yeah, and that's where you have to start with the Jets this offseason. They have to figure out what they're going to do at the quarterback position. This is what I would do if I was Aaron Glenn and Darren Moogie, the new GM for the Jets. I would make Tyrod Taylor a bridge quarterback for us. When you look at the history of Tyrod Taylor and places he's been, right? The Cleveland Browns, Baker Mayfield, he was a bridge quarterback for him. That worked out for Baker Mayfield. You look at when he went to the Chargers, right? Justin Herbert was there as a rookie. He was a bridge quarterback for him. So this is a guy that everybody loves in that locker room. I've spent time with the New York Jets, worked with them as well. His teammates love him. Tyrod Taylor is a consummate pro. He's a guy that can really help with a young quarterback. I say a backup plan, Justin Fields, right? He's going to be a free agent from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was a guy that was 4-2 last year before Mike Tomlin decided that he was going to instead let Russell Wilson take over the starting ranks in Pittsburgh. So I think Justin Fields, only being 25 years old, he's still very young. Still a lot of football, a lot of thread on that tire. And then I say you draft a guy like Jackson Dart potentially in the second round to be the guy of the future. He can sit behind Tyrod Taylor for a year or two until he's actually ready to become the starting quarterback. A lot of tools in his bag. The thing is, he's going to need to work on processing a lot faster, getting the ball out of his hand and throwing with anticipation. But all the tools are there for Jackson Dart. So if I was the New York Jets, Tyrod Taylor, backup plan, Justin Fields, draft Jackson Dart in the second round.
Got to ask about potential franchise players that they could tag. We got DJ Reed over there. What do you think about keeping that young corner around via the tag?
He's going to be the top corner in the market. I just don't think the Jets are going to tag him because they still have Sauce Gardner, who could get a potential new deal this offseason. Now, Sauce didn't have his best season last year, but he could potentially get a new deal. DJ Reed, again, is going to be the top corner, probably with Carlton Davis out on the free agent market, and he's going to have a robust market. He played his tail off last year, and he played through injury last year as well, so that goes a long way when teams are looking at impending free agents. Did a guy shut it down when the season didn't look good for him, or did he go out there and compete? And DJ Reed did that at a high level.
Never stop.
Never
Always
stop.
compete.
Never.
Great advice. All right, looking at the Dolphins next. Now that the Tyreek Hill drama kind of figured itself out.
The little drama they had.
Yeah, the Dolphins, you got to think they were focusing on two major things. So shoring up their O-line and then handling their top free agent in Holland. So what do they need to do?
So I go back and forth with this. And I love Javon Holland. Spent some time with him at Miami Dolphins training camp this past year. Hasn't really played well the last 2 years. Right now, he was very vocal about Vic Fangio, who was the defensive coordinator there last year, and the way he used his skill set. And then Vic Fangio goes to the Philadelphia Eagles, JD, and they win a Super Bowl. So was it the scheme or was it the player? Now, he has a lot of upside. The kid's only 24 years old. He's a ball-hawking safety, so he's going to have a robust market. I just don't know because the Miami Dolphins are already in negative when it comes to the cap. Will they be able to actually afford him or even tag him? Because when you tag a safety, I think it's going to be around $19 million because the top safeties in the NFL, the top 5, are averaging between $19 and $21 million. So I don't know if the Dolphins will feel comfortable tagging him at that price tag. But you talked about it, JD. The interior offensive line was abysmal last year. They need to really fix that. I think losing Robert Hunt to the Carolina Panthers, I don't think they knew how big of the loss that was going to be. They need to shore up that interior offensive line and the interior defensive line as well.
Going to be a big year for the head coach trying to prove he can be a winner. And Tua as well. I mean,
for sure.
Look, what does he have to show you this upcoming season?
That he can stay healthy, first and foremost. I mean, that's been the issue, right? He played 17 games the year before, got the contract, but then got hurt twice this past year, right? Didn't even finish the season. So first and foremost, Tua Tagovailoa has to prove that he can stay healthy. Now, the thing is, you see the touchdown to interception ratio every year. He's one of the most accurate passers in all of football, and he has a winning percentage. So we can win games with Tua Tagovailoa under the center. But the thing is, he has to prove that he can stay healthy. And you see it right there, the longest active drought to win a playoff game. The Dolphins currently own it with 24 straight seasons.
And you could argue that this last team we're going to talk about is in a better place right now than the Dolphins, maybe than the Jets as well. And that's the New England Patriots, who have all kinds of money to spend. Like $120 million to spend in the cap. And they've got their franchise QB, and they've got a new head coach in Mike Vrabel.
And that's the thing. They have a boatload of money, but they also have so many issues that they have to fill. This roster, when you look at it, first and foremost, they have to protect Drake May. He got beat up last year. I think Will Campbell at the number 4 pick makes a lot of sense. A guy that I have playing left tackle. A lot of people say he's going to kick inside the guard, and as you hear people talk all the time, well, just kick him in at guard. That's not the easiest thing to do. Will Campbell has been one of the top offensive tackles in all of football and one of the toughest conferences in the SEC. Then I thought that they could potentially maybe go get T. Higgins guys, but it looks like he may get franchise tag. So backup plan, Chris Godwin. I don't see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers franchising him a third time because that hit would be almost quarterback money. $39 million. So I don't see Chris Godwin potentially getting tagged. You saw what he was doing through the first 7 weeks of the season. First in the NFL in receptions, second in receiving yards, tied third in receiving touchdown. He was having a career year, and he's only 28 years old, so he's still relatively young, even though this will be his third year on his deal. The thing is, he is coming off an ankle injury, so there is some concerns there, and he's also torn an ACL in the past, but I think that makes a lot of sense for them as well. And then they got to get better pass rushers. Josh Sweat, a guy that a lot of people thought could have been the MVP of the Super Bowl, 2.5 sacks. He's going to be a free agent at the right time. I think they can really turn over their pass rush by getting Josh Sweat.
Wow. They would all look good in a Patriots uniform.
They
I'm
would.
Just saying.
They got the money to spend it, too.
They got it. They got it. Got to dish it out. All right, we should use the ball getting us ready for this free agency season that's now upon us. And, of course, there's no offseason in football. We know that. We have you covered here on CBS Sports HQ, news analysis, and all you need to know in the world of football. You can find us streaming 24/7 so that you are always in the know. Back here on HQ, looking at the odds to win the Super Bowl entering the 2024 season. So, reminder, this is last year. You see the San Francisco 49ers at plus 550 on top of the list. Then the Kansas City Chiefs, who are looking for that three-peat, right after them at plus 600. The Ravens following suit. Now, looking at the most losses in a season after a Super Bowl loss, the Raiders topping that list, 4-12. In 2003 after winning Super Bowl 38. And looking at you, San Fran, last season going 6-11. This is a list you do not want to be on.
I was on that 99 Falcons team.
Congrats.
Jenny. Yeah.
Good job. Danny Kanell, Pete Prisco.
We lost. Injuries have a lot to do with it. Jamal Anderson set the record for carries in 98 when they went to the Super Bowl and lost. And then it was either week 1 or 2. He held out all offseason, got his new deal. First week, Hurts tears his ACL, done for the year.
That's it.
Team was done.
That's it. That's all it takes. That's why injuries just can ruin seasons. All right, we're going to break down the offseason needs for the NFC West, and we're going to kick it off with the Niners. Not the season that they were expecting. Brock Purdy entering the final year of his rookie contract. Pete, where do you think Purdy stands? Is there a point where we can expect him to sign an extension at this point?
Well, I think you have to.
Yeah.
And he's going to get big money. I mean, there were times last year where he carried that team, and they weren't very good around him, and he did do some good things. Now the question becomes, where's the money go to? Does it get to $50 million? Do you pay Brock Purdy $50 million? Well, you know, look, I think they're in a situation where they're going to have to pay him, and they will pay him. And if they do, then now all of a sudden the clock starts beating again on your salary cap. And what do? They've got a lot of decisions to make. That's why Deebo Samuel is on the trade market, or will be on the trade market, and should be on the trade market, because quite frankly, I don't think he was very good last year. Looked a little overweight, looks slow, sluggish. They need to fix their offensive line. You know, Trent Williams has to stay on the field. That's important, obviously. And then they have some other issues as well. So I think getting the defense figured out, Robert Saleh back in there, I think that's good for them. But they have to figure out what they're going to do with Brock Purdy first and foremost.
I think there's a couple contracts you could look at. I look at what the Packers did with Jordan Love, which on paper reads as a 4-year, $55 million average annual value, but in reality, it's a 3-year deal that's $110. I think if you can get Brock Purdy to agree something like that, where you're going to have the 3 years where you're guaranteed a lot of money, and then if you're playing well and it continues, then you restructure and you just keep kicking the can down the road and restructure your contract so it's a little bit more cap friendly. But I do think this is where it gets really interesting, because I'm sure Brock Purdy's agent is like, we want to break the bank. We want to have, you are a starting quarterback in the NFL, and we know that typically that happens where you set the new highest value. I wonder if Brock Value realized what a situation he's in with Kyle Shanahan, with Christian McCaffrey, with Kittle, with some of the weapons that he's got around him, and being able to spread some of that money out. But that's a conversation that he has to have with his agent, see if they can come up with a deal that I think looks good when you read it as a headline, but it's much more cap friendly.
Yeah, and look, if it looks like an average of $50 million on paper, they can brag about it. You know how that goes, even if it isn't what it is. But and if you're Purdy, you do want to get as much money up front as you possibly can, because that's the way this league operates. But it's going to be a tough negotiation, because you have to sit here and say, is he really one of those elite quarterbacks? And he's going to get paid like it, but should he get paid like it?
I think he's Jalen Hurts. I think he could be the exact same quarterback as Jalen Hurts. If you put him on that Eagles team, I think he could have won that Super Bowl.
That's a big statement right there.
But I do think they're similar.
Eagle fans come at you.
They will. They can bring it, because I think they're very similar. I think they're great winners. They have a great mentality. They bring good leadership. They can take you to a Super Bowl, and Hurts just proved he can win one. I think if you put Purdy in a situation like he's already been there and been to the Super Bowl, he can win one too.
All right, let's move on to the LA Rams, a team that has been to a Super Bowl. Cooper Kupp on the trading block now. We're going to chat about that more in a minute. Matthew Stafford, I mean, that's just a quarterback that's in limbo right now. We've heard his name multiple times on this show so far. What happens?
Well, I think he has no guaranteed money on his contract this year. And if you're one of the quarterbacks in this league and you look around at the money being thrown around, you're saying, hey, wait a second, I need to get some of that. So I think they're going to negotiate. I think they'll try and get a deal done. But if they can't, then obviously you got to do something about that. But I asked the Rams this. What's your solution if you get rid of him? How are you fixing that position? Do they go get Aaron Rodgers? I mean, he has a home in L.A.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
He has a home in L.A. So, you know, do you draft the guy and maybe, you know, wait until next year when the quarterback class is pretty good, let Rodgers play for 2 years and then draft the guy? I think when you look at what the Rams did in the playoffs, they came back in that game against Philly and had a real chance to beat him in the snow because of Matt Stafford. If you're the Rams, you got to figure out a contract and let him finish his career with the Rams. You traded the assets to go get him. I don't know what you're going to get for him if you trade him, but I think you have to keep him there, and I think they will.
I agree, and I think Matthew Stafford wants to finish his career there. At this point, he's 37 years old. I don't think you want to
the whole family.
Yeah, exactly. They all like it. I think it makes sense. I think they figure out a way to get it done. Part of that is the pain of getting rid of Cooper Kupp, trying to get. Remember, Les Snead was pretty vocal about screw them picks. Remember, now he's trying to recover some of those by trading away one of the faces of the franchise. But that's what the price that comes with. You have to pay the piper sometime down the road.
They're slow. The Rams are a slow team, and I think Cooper Kupp kind of plays into that. He's slower than he was, which was never a burner to begin with. They don't scare anybody down the field. Puka Nacua is a good receiver, but doesn't scare you down the field. You know, Kyron Williams, good running back, but he doesn't have the home run speed. They need to get faster. I think that's priority number one for them after they figure out what they're going to do with Matt Stafford.
All right, next team we need to figure out what they're going to do. The Cardinals, their head coach, Jonathan Gannon, in his second season, they doubled their win total. They were sitting in first place in the NFC West mid-November, and then things kind of fell off. Where do they begin? Where do they need to spend some money, Pete?
Well, they're another team that needs to get better on the defensive line. You know, their defense was feisty. They did some really good things. I think Gannon really did some good stuff with that defense. The defensive coordinator is a good young coach. But you only can do so much when you don't have players. And you look around that defense, they didn't have a ton of players. So they need to get better on that side of the ball. I think when you look at, look at White, unrestricted free agent, did some really good things. But do you bring him back? He was one of the leaders that they loved. So I think they need to address defense. They need to get a big body in the middle of that defense, a guy who can really stop the run and impact them on the defensive side of the ball.
Good news is they have a ton of money to spend. Kyler Murray's kind of looked like he's matured to a point.
Tailed off a little bit at the end of last season, which was concerning.
He did, but they don't have any contract issues to worry about with him.
Nope.
So you have your quarterback under contract for the foreseeable future. So I think this is a time where you spend on the defensive side of the ball. Like you said, you've got a defensive-minded coach. I would think that's what they address first.
Okay, last but not least, we got Seattle. Mike McDonald's second season. They got a new DC. They're changing things around offensively, bringing in Clint Kubiak as OCO there. Where do the Seahawks take that next step, Pete?
Well, it's funny because we could have the same conversation about almost every team. The offensive line.
Yeah,
you look at their offensive line. They had major issues on that group last year, and they couldn't really do the things they wanted to do, which is why they made a change at coordinator. So now you got to get better up front. You got to protect the quarterback. You got to be able to let him throw the ball. He took a lot of hits last year, and they didn't run the ball the way they want to. So I think first and foremost, the offensive line has to be a priority.
Especially when you have a QB like Geno Smith, who's not the most mobile guy. He's more of an antiquated guy that's like Matthew Stafford, kind of a throwback now with the way we've seen quarterbacks running the football. So it is imperative they keep him upright and healthy, because I know Clint Kubiak is going to want to have a run-based attack that can establish the ground and protect their quarterback with a play-action pass.
It's funny. I was on a station in Seattle, and they asked me where are the Seahawks in the division, and if I answered that question honestly going into next season, I would probably say they were fourth. Right? Wouldn't you? I mean, with the Cardinals having the money, they're going to be able to go add to that roster. A lot of good young players. I think the Cardinals may have moved ahead of them.
Well, a lot of O-line help needed out there. So if you're an O-lineman, you're in a good spot right now. We got not a running back though. No, we don't need any of those. Pete Prisco, Danny Kanell. Appreciate you guys as always. Looking at key dates in the NFL free agency running through March 4th at 4 p.m. The NFL Combine starts on February 24th through March 3rd. New league year officially beginning on March 12th. And the NFL Draft, that one's circled April 24th. After losing the Super Bowl to the Eagles, the Chiefs have now lost 4 games by 17 points or more with Mahomes as their starting quarterback. 2 of those 4 losses were in Super Bowls. So Super Bowl 59, we just saw that, final score of 40-22. And Super Bowl 55, it was a 22-point margin in a 31-9 loss to the Buccaneers. So after that loss in 2020, there were some key changes made to the team. They drafted center Creed Humphrey. They traded for Orlando Brown Jr., who's now with the Bengals, and they signed Joe Thuney to a 5-year, $80 million contract. Now, they made necessary moves to get back to the Super Bowl. They did have a 1-year hiatus, but then we saw the success that they had after that. So what moves should they make now? Pete Prisco and Danny Kanell here to answer those questions. So they have a tight salary cap. We know that, roughly $1 million over, and quite a lengthy list of free agents when you look at what they have going on there. So what does KC need to do this offseason to get back to that NFL mountaintop, Pete?
Well, I think it starts with developing. And, you know, everybody wants to get rid of the left tackle they drafted last year, Kingsley Sumatia, and they want to get rid of him and say, hey, let's move on. But he wasn't ready to play, but you draft him, you develop him. And so he's got to be ready to play. You can't just go outside every year and pay somebody to play that spot. Wanya Morris is another younger player. So I think they have to get the left tackle position solidified. That's first and foremost. Trey Smith, the right guard's an unrestricted free agent. They have to decide if they're going to bring him back. I would bring him back, find a way to make that happen, and keep your interior guys. As far as the rest of this group, I think Trey Smith will come back. Nick Bolton's a big part of their defense because he calls the signals. They'd love to have him back, but that price gets a little out of whack. He goes. I think Justin Reed's up in the years. They drafted a kid last year, Jaden Hicks, out of Washington State, who I think is ready to take his spot. Marquise Brown, look, he didn't do a lot last year because he was hurt, so they figured out a way. They get Rashee Rice back, and now you get him going again, so I think he goes outdoor as well. I think the biggest thing they have to do, they have to get better at left tackle. Now, if you draft a guy in the second round, you clearly think he's going to be that guy. Now you have to develop him.
Yeah, I mean, it was a revolving door at left tackle last year, and they tried him, and it often happens. I mean, you're a young player, you're a rookie, there's a big jump that you have to make, so I agree with you there, but I think you have to have a pretty solid backup option, too, whether that's somebody they sign that's a veteran in the free agent market. But I think you saw, and Jenny brought it up, like they made that adjustment after the last Super Bowl, looked at the offensive line and said, we have the best quarterback in the game right now, but it doesn't matter how good you are, you have to protect him. I also think they need to add another piece to the wide receiving corps. Xavier Worthy was a ninth find, and we saw him develop on the back end of the year and really become a difference maker for them. But some of that wide receiving core is getting older, and we saw some of the list there of players they're going to lose, and others like Juju Smith-Schuster who just are getting up there in age. Like to see them maybe draft somebody there, and then somebody to give Chris Jones and they're on defensive line some help getting after the passer. One thing you watched was when Patrick Mahomes was running for his life, Jalen Hurts had all day to throw. So I'd like to see them add somebody as a pass rusher on the defensive side of the ball.
If Trey Smith leaves and they decide they don't want to pay him the big deal, there are guards on the market you can bring in, and bring them in short-term deals that kind of will let them, you know, Zach Martin's going to be on the market. I mean, do you want to get a veteran like that? If you wanted to go veteran left tackle to solidify that group, maybe Tyron Smith, you get the Cowboys band together and let them play right guard and left tackle. So there are options out there for them. Whatever they do, number one priority has to be solidifying the offensive line.
Solidify and develop. They do have 4 picks in the top 100 in this year's draft as well, so they can get some talent out there in that capacity. Now, we also have the situation we have to mention with Travis Kelce out there saying he needs a little bit of time to think about his NFL future. How did the Chiefs kind of handle this decision with their star? What do they need to do? Do they just sit back and just wait for Kelce to make this choice?
And probably get on their hands and knees and hope he retires. I mean, no. I mean, look, he's not the same player. He clearly is not. And I thought in the Super Bowl that there were times where he didn't give the utmost effort in certain situations, and that's never a good look. So I think maybe he realizes it's time and he walks away from it, because he's not the same player. He doesn't scare anybody down the field. He doesn't have the suddenness that he used to play with. So what do? I think if he retires, they have guys. They drafted Wiley out of TCU, who's a kid I really like. I think he has a chance to be a guy who can be a productive tight end for him. So I think in the ideal world, Kelce's done. They move on from him.
This is where they have to have great communication with Travis Kelce. Jenny, yourself, what do they do? I think they do need to give him his time. Let him say, hey, take your time, catch your breath. To me, he looked burned out. whether it was on the field, whether it was in media night earlier in the week when he was getting tired of the Taylor Swift questions, which I get. He must get those everywhere he goes. But then the effort on the field was almost inexplicable from a player of his caliber, where he did look slow, but there was effort issues on some of the pass blocking
He admitted it kind of after this. There
were times when he was just standing around.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think it should be noted that at his age 35, you've already had a lot of wear and tear in your body, and the success they've had has allowed them to play so many more games than most other players are playing at his age. So he's already getting 3 or 4 more games every season. This is your 3rd Super Bowl in a row. He's got a lot of wear and tear on him. I think he has to make clear to himself that he is mentally invested in coming back for another year if he wants to do that.
Yeah, how committed is he to the offseason? Because he does a lot of stuff in the offseason now, and he doesn't look like he's in the greatest shape in the world. The other thing is in the playoffs, we always counted on him. Well, we saw him against the Texans and say, okay, it's playoff time, here goes Kelsey. Then he disappeared. He didn't do anything for the next 2 games. So that's a major worry when you get to be that age.
Getting old, getting up there.
Yeah,
Got to make
good.
some tough decisions. We're going to look at the Chargers next. So a top 5 defense with holes to fill this offseason. Edge rusher Khalil Mack, he would have been a good candidate for that franchise tag, but there is language in his contract that they can't tag him. So where do they begin, Pete?
Well, I think this is another team that has to look at the interior of their offensive line. They got the 2 tackles. Slater is outstanding at left tackle. They drafted Alt to be the right tackle. He's going to be a really good one. But the interior had problems. And I think if they want to run the ball, they have to be more physical inside. And I think that's something we'll look at. You talk about the running back position. How do they run the ball? Dobbins is an unrestricted free agent, did some good things for him, but is he the long-term answer? What do? Do they go in the free agency and sign one? There's some talk of Harris from the Steelers. You go in there and maybe being that brutish running back that Jim Harbaugh and that group would like to have. So I think they need to get physical in the middle of that line, run the ball better. And on the other side of the ball, they need to stop the run. They did a better job of it, but they're never that big on the defensive line. They're always small. So they have a tendency to get pushed around sometimes in key games.
I think this is a good draft for defensive line, pass rusher, edge talent. So if it's selecting at 22, that could be an option for him there. I agree with you. And when I go back to what they potentially will address, you mentioned, remember Jim Harbaugh last year when he was talking about the offensive line? Remember how passionate he got about it, like tip of the spear, and he was so emotional, gave this impassioned speech? You're right, Pete. They got the outside taken care of. Now it's time to take care of the interior of that offensive line, because that does seem to me fundamentally what Harbaugh wants to do is run the football, be physical, and I think it starts up front.
They got to tick over $63 million in salary cap space out there. And Pete, you touched upon this. So if you look at the offensive line and the offensive side of the ball, Ladd McConkey really was a star for this team, but Justin Herbert does need some more weapons. So you touched upon it, but who are some more targets that they can get to kind of get their rush-heavy offense going?
Well, if you wanted to go in that direction, which I wouldn't, by the way, I'd wait to the draft. I think the draft is loaded with running backs. I think you can get good ones in the 3rd and 4th round, so I wouldn't go out and pay big money for any of these guys. If they're going to come on a team-friendly deal, I'd be intrigued by Harris in that situation. He's more of a plotter, and I think that's what Harbaugh really wants to do with that offense, is become a plotting offense. That's not my preference. If I'm the Chargers, I'd get somebody who can catch the ball out of the backfield, be a factor, rip off long runs, and kind of take the pressure off of Herbert a little bit, because they have to run the ball consistently better than they have run it.
I'd be curious how because I don't think they should. I know you're going to be against the philosophy of paying a running back top-tier money in the free agent market, but what about taking a running back at 22 in the 1st round, where you get the rookie contract for 5 years? If Ashton Genty's sitting there at a 22,
he won't be, though, I don't think.
That's the dilemma. If you can get Travion Henderson, who's, again, he's split reps. I think if Genty's there, it's a no-brainer, but I do think it becomes a little bit more trickier if you have that 22nd pick and there's, Genty's off the board. Do you still take a running back?
See, what I would do is I would wait until the 3rd round to take her. I think this is a deep running back class. I mean, you know it. There's a ton of them in the. Judkins is in the class, and he, guys like that. You can find running backs in the 3rd round who will come in and contribute right away. You draft them.
Genty's the only guy I would consider at the 1st round. I think he's the type of difference maker where I do think there comes when there's guys that are available, like a Bijan Robinson, like a Saquon Barkley. Those guys were top 5 picks, but I think Genty is that caliber.
And you know what? They were top 5 picks. How the Falcons done with their top 5 running back pick?
Right.
How did the Giants do with their top 5 running back pick? I mean, and the Lions, they drafted Gibbs high in the 1st round, and everybody, we rave about him. He's a great player, but I don't think they've sniffed this. I mean, they've been in the Super Bowl yet with him, have they?
No.
And so I I don't look. You can find running backs. You can draft them. Here's where the problem comes into play: value of pick and position. And the reason I say that is a running back in year 5, year 6 is an old guy. A tackle in year 8 or 9 is in the prime. Yeah. That's the biggest difference. So that's why you look for different positions.
Love your philosophy on running backs, Pete.
Draft them, develop them, run them into the ground, and get another one. But don't draft them in the first round.
Yes. All right, we're going to move on to the Broncos now. They're really in their prime winning window with their rookie quarterback and Bo Nix over there. You would imagine that getting him like a quality tight end or another proven receiver would be helpful. But where do they need to get the most help there, Pete?
Well, I think, you mentioned the tight end. I think that's something that they'll look at. But also, you keep hearing Sean Payton talk about the Joker. And the Joker is the guy who can do so many different things. And a guy you can put it, Deebo Samuel was a Joker in his heyday. He was a guy you could line up in different spots, play receiver, play running back, get him out of the backfield.
If you will.
Tyler Warren would be a great pick for the Denver Broncos. He won't be there when they pick, but he would be a great pick for the Denver Broncos. Somebody along those lines, a guy they can move around, create matchup problems, make it a little bit easier for Bo Nix. I think that's somebody you can really, really add to that offense.
I think of a guy like Luther Burden out of Missouri, who's more of a slot guy, gadget player, if you will, Joker, that type of player. I think he'd be a good fit. I also think they do need to add some weapon that they can work with, because Cortland Sutton and Marvin Mims are nice, but they're by far from being an elite crew of wide receivers. And a lot of the quarterbacks we've seen have success, Jalen Hurts is a great example. Look at the receivers he's got on the outside. And especially with a quarterback who's young and developing, you've got to give him better weapons.
But they have Franklin, and they, so they have some youth there. I think they'll be okay at wide receiver. They do need linebackers too. They have some issues there, injury issues. And Barton, as you saw there, is an unrestricted free agent. He played a lot.
I want to throw up that free agents list as well, just real quick. They have a sizable list of looming free agents that are on there. Javonte Williams, DJ Jones. How do you think they handle kind of these players?
Well, McMillan's been their slot corner. They might go for an upgrade there, but I think they might try and bring him back. Barton, look, he was a fill-in anyways. They had guys get hurt. I think he's going to be out the door. I think Jones they'd like to bring back. I think he will come back. Zach Wilson, look, you're a backup quarterback. He likes playing there. He's friendly with Bo Nix. I would imagine they would bring him back.
Yep.
You agree?
Yeah, I do. Right. Javonte Williams, another one. You don't want to pay the running back a ton of money. They could draft somebody.
And he hasn't looked like the same guy. Yeah. I mean, you hate to say that, but since his injury, he hasn't been the same guy.
We're going to move on. Last but not least, we got the Las Vegas Raiders. They got Tom Brady helping out in the front office. They got money to spend. They have a glaring hole at quarterback. So, Pete, how do they fix it? Where do they fix it?
Well, I think they're going to look at Sam Darnold. I think that's something to keep an eye on. What do the Vikings do with him? If I'm the Vikings, I probably wouldn't just let him leave without any kind of compensation. I'd try and figure that out. But I think they have to get a quarterback. Look at this group. It's a who's who of how not to. That's what that is. I mean, look, Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, and Desmond Ridder. That ain't exactly a murderer's row when it comes to the quarterback position. So I think they have to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback. The question becomes, do they nose around Matt Stafford? I mean, that's a possibility. If you're the Raiders, you have to look at that. Also, Aaron Rodgers is out there. He's a West Coast guy. So
how far down the list is Aaron Rodgers in the first phone calls that these guys are making?
Well, I think the first phone call they make will be to Matt Stafford to see if they can get that done. The second one would be to see what the price is on Sam Darnold, and the third one would be to Aaron Rodgers, because you're not giving up anything for him, and you're probably not going to have to pay him that much money. I think Rodgers, at the end of last year, started to look like Aaron Rodgers a little bit. Remember, that injury was far worse than he let on. He was clearly impacted by it early in the season, and I think as the season went on, he got better. And that's not to say, he's 40 years old. It's not to say it's just going to carry over. But I did see some things at the end of last season that would lead me to believe he's still better than what they have right now. I can tell you that right now.
So if you went that route and got one of these top free agents, are you passing on QB at 6, or are you going to go both? Like if you went Sam Darnold, who's probably going to command pretty top dollar, or Aaron Rodgers, or Matthew Stafford, where you're going to have to give up some trade value, will you then, that's your quarterback for the next 2 or 3 years, you deal with that later? Because I went the mindset of you bring in a Daniel Jones, some guy that's clearly a bridge quarterback, and then you drafted Shador, who's
but how do you know he's going to be there, though?
At 6.
Well, that's the risk you have to run.
Right. Then you're stuck with Daniel Jones being your quarterback for the next year.
Right.
I mean, because ideally you bring Daniel Jones in that scenario and you play him for 8 games and then you put Shador Sanders in. But you don't know if you're going to get Shador Sanders, so you might need to make a move.
I will say, you'd have to move up.
I was going to say, is it worth trading up at that point?
And here's the other part of that equation. How good is Shedeur Sanders?
We don't know.
We don't know.
But you got to speculate on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, just doing my first work on these quarterbacks, there were probably 4 or 5 in last year's draft that I would take it ahead of both of them, to be honest with you.
Yeah. There's only one quarterback in this class that I think is top 5 worthy, and it's Cam Ward. It's not Shedeur Sanders.
And I don't love him.
Yeah. He's a little erratic.
Little loose with the football.
Yes, he is.
Got to get some more QBs out there. Danny, you want to come out of retirement?
Well, don't forget, they're going to push Jackson Dart up the board. They're going to go get Kyle McCord up the board. Don't worry, everybody's desperate for quarterbacks. These guys are going to get pushed up the board.
You guys don't go anywhere. We're looking at the Super Bowl odds for next season. The Eagles, the early favorite at 650 as they look to win their 2nd consecutive bowl. Then right behind them, the Kansas City Chiefs and the Ravens. Then we've also got the Bills right at plus 750, then the Lions and the Niners. Then the list starts dwindling from there.
Well, the NFC South has been all about the Bucs lately. For the 4th consecutive season, Tampa Bay, your division winners, advancing to the playoffs for a 5th straight year. That is the longest active streak by a team in the NFC. But some big changes coming to Tampa Bay this offseason. Most notably, they lost their offensive coordinator, Liam Cohen, who is now in charge of the Jags right up the road there. And there's also questions about Chris Godwin, another key free agent to address. But there's no question when it comes to the dominance that the Bucs have had in this division over the last 4 years. They have won it 4 times. This division really just like a division of runs. The Saints won it 4 times previously to that, and then the Panthers had it 3 times in a row. But the Bucs right now are on top. Maybe some work to do going forward. Let's welcome in our NFL team, I almost said NBA team, of Bryant McFadden and John Breech to discuss what the NFC South can do to get a little better going into 2025. So, guys, let's start at the top with the champs. There's no more Liam Cohen. It's now Josh Grizzard's role over there at OC, and it seems like the biggest order of business there is to get Chris Godwin back. Breech, what do you think about the Bucs? How can they improve going into the offseason?
Yeah, that's obviously something that is on their radar. We already know they've kind of extended the deadline on his contract so they can get a deal done. If you look at Chris Godwin, meant to this offense, he played a huge part before he suffered that season-ending injury back in October. He had 50 catches for 576 yards. He was averaging over 80 yards per game. So he is obviously a key part of that offense, and you want to have him back when you're breaking in that new offensive coordinator. Baker Mayfield would love to have him back. But then the other side of this, the Buccaneers had a very prolific offense. What they didn't have was a defense that could stop the pass. So I think that's another part where the Bucs are going to have to focus. This team gave up the 4th most passing yards in the NFL last season. They didn't generate a lot of pass rush outside of Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey. You look at their linebackers. We saw Levante David's about to be a free agent, so they could stand to add someone in the draft or free agency at the linebacker position. And even corners, they could probably use some depth there. So I think the Buccaneers, yes, you need Chris Godwin, but I think the focus for them probably needs to be adding some depth pieces on defense.
Yeah, Chris Godwin is the top priority for this team when you look at their free agents. He's shown the ability, John, to come off season-ending injuries and still give you great sound production. This will be his 2nd injury that he had to miss the rest of the year, but he's been able to bounce back. And then you got to look at life after Mike Evans. Mike Evans is still putting up outstanding numbers, but you have to get prepared for life after Mike Evans because he's closer to the end of his career than the beginning. And Chris Godwin is clearly lockstep to be able to fill that wide receiver 1 option whenever Mike Evans decides to call it quits. And then you look at the defense, I'm right there with you. You know, trading away Carlton Davis, it seemed like it was a good move at the time, but they really missed him in terms of his lockdown potential and the depth. You know, Jamel Dean was the next best corner, but he missed a lot of time because of injuries. And they didn't have the necessary production to follow when you were missing Jamel Dean. So trying to add more depth in the secondary, especially the cornerback position, would be a big-time necessity for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
You know, despite those defensive deficiencies, the Bucs were the first team to start the year 4-6 and still reach the playoffs in back-to-back seasons. So I don't know, maybe the Bengals need to take some notes there when it comes to how the Bucs are finishing out the regular season. Let's talk about the Falcons, guys. You know, a year ago, we were talking about this big move. Kirk Cousins was going to take the top off of this Atlanta squad. And now we're talking about his replacement, Michael Penix, that era set to begin. B-Mac, what excites you about what the Falcons can do around Penix? And to take it a step further, how do they set him up for success this offseason?
Well, what excites me about this offense, they have the ability to be one of the more explosive offenses in the National Football League, starting with their quarterback in Michael Penix. I love Bijan Robertson. He has the ability to be and do it all back for their offense, an offensive weapon. I love unlocking Drake May. We saw what he did this season with Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix. He is a bona fide wide receiver one. You look at Darnell Mooney, became a big-time playmaker. Potentially adding more talent to the tight end room would be huge. And then when you factor in Michael Penix, I mean, John, he did a really, really good job stepping in for this team towards the latter part of 2024. And he didn't blink at all. The moment never seemed to be too big for him. And you have to be optimistic about Penix, knowing that he is QB1 to start this offseason process as he gets ready for the upcoming regular season. So he will get all the necessary reps to be at his best and to be, most importantly, comfortable for this offense moving forward. So you have to really like their chances in knowing the type of talent he has at the quarterback position.
Yeah, and B-Mac is absolutely right. You love the talent that the Falcons have around Michael Penix, whether that's Drake London, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts. So the offense is pretty stacked. They'll have to worry a little bit about the center position because Drew Dahlman's set to be a free agent. So that's a hole you're going to have to fill. Let's not forget, sometimes the best offense is a good defense. If you don't want Michael Penix being forced to go out there and win shootouts every week next season, you really have to fortify that defense. So the Falcons are going to have to make some moves during free agency, especially at pass. They need to add a pass rusher. This team had just 31 sacks last season. That was the second fewest in the NFL. We see Matt Judon. He's going to be a free agent. They have defensive tackles, Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata. Both those guys are over 30, so they're getting up there in age. They're both expensive. Maybe one or both of them become cap casualties. You look in the secondary, they probably could stand to add some cornerback depth. So I think as much as they're going to want to help Michael Penix, they're really going to need to focus on the defense. And one problem for the Falcons is they don't have a ton of money. So it's not like they can go on a huge spending spree in free agency. They're going to have to make smart moves, and they're also going to have to make smart draft picks because that's how you add players without spending a lot of money.
Well, I think Michael Penix was one of the biggest surprises of the draft when he was taken for the Falcons, and it paid off. 8th most passing yards in the NFL from week 16 to 18 as a starter. So if you like the Falcons offense, I think it's in pretty good hands there. Continuing our NFC South offseason conversation here, we head to Carolina, gentlemen, where Bryce Young is back behind center. It seems like they've locked up the backup plan just in case things kind of go awry again like they did last year. They signed Andy Dalton to that nice little extension. But Breech, when it comes to this Panthers team, we know that they need a lot of work. It's why we've kind of made them a little bit of a joke as the years have gone on here. How do we get them to be competitive with Bryce Young behind center, Breech?
How long do we have, Haley? Do I have 40 minutes to go through this? Because the Panthers have a lot of issues here. And we can start. We don't have to bring up Bryce Young right now. You look at the defense. They gave up the most yards per game in the NFL last season. They gave up the most points per game. They kind of need help at every single level, whether that is linebacker, whether that's secondary, whether that's at defensive tackle. The loss, getting rid of Brian Burns, obviously losing a huge talent there when trading him away. So the Panthers need a lot of help on defense. Now, if you look at their offense, you're probably feeling a little bit more optimistic, especially after Bryce Young rebounded following that week 3 benching. He came back. He looked better every single week. He seemed like he had a better understanding of Dave Canales' offense. And now Dave Canales is going to have a whole entire offseason to kind of develop that offense around Bryce Young's skill set. So you feel really good about that. And then you look at their offense, signing Chuba Hubbard to an extension was smart because he was such a key part of that. And I think if the Panthers are going to do one thing to help Bryce Young, they absolutely have to add a receiver. Adam Thielen's good. Xavier Legette is good. But I think you need at least one more playmaker in there to help Bryce Young. And I think that's one thing they need to do in free agency. But the Panthers offense does look like they're taking a few steps forward. And obviously Bryce Young looked much better at the end of the season. So I think they feel pretty good about where the offense is headed.
I also need them to set him up for success. Do you remember the video that went viral at training camp when he's got that big old backpack and he's walking in like he was like in his first day of school? I need them to make him look like he's not a teenager in those videos because that was really funny to see. Guys, let's wrap up our conversation here with the New Orleans Saints, where we know Kellen Moore is walking into problems left and right. They've got a really janky roster going on right now. Not sure who's going to be the quarterback next season. And guys, it's going to be tough to fix it given the limitations, I should say, they have with the cap. So B-Mac, when you look at Kellen Moore, first time as a head coach, tasked with recreating this Saints roster, how does he do it? Where do we even begin?
It's going to be a difficult situation for Kellen Moore because of the cap hell they're currently sitting in. You know, one of the more casual shows that I love to watch, Haley, John, is Lottery Dream Home. And that's a show that consists of individuals or a family that win a lottery to purchase their dream home. But the more confusing episodes that I watch are when you watch these individuals get their dream home and you look at the house and you're like, where did you spend the money? That's the New Orleans Saints. For them to be in a cap spot that they're currently sitting in, and you look at their roster, you look at their wins, where did you spend the money? You were 5-12 last year, and don't forget they started the season off 2-0. They flatlined tremendously throughout the rest of the way, and now it's almost like it's a rebuild situation. Because to improve the roster, you have to find a way to finesse the cap hell you're in the midst of. Not to mention hitting on draft picks as well. So this is going to be a rebuild type situation for the New Orleans Saints because number one, they don't have the financial resources that some of the other teams have to improve their roster. It'd be one thing, John, Haley, if you looked at where they currently sit with a cap and you see nice wins, you see playoff appearances, but you haven't seen either or, and they have spent a lot of money in the wrong places. So if you're Kellen Moore, and most importantly, if you're the New Orleans Saints fan base, a very, very authentic, rabid fan base, you have to exercise patience with this situation under this new regime because you got to get out of debt. They're in debt right now, so you got to find a way to get out of debt, pay those necessary bills off, and then find a way to go get some veteran players. And like I said, most importantly, hit on the draft. So this draft for Kellen Moore is very, very important because they don't have the money they need to allocate to veteran players. So they got to do it the cheap route. And the last time I checked, we all love bargain deals. We're all a bargain shopper. So when you can find you a great item for less, you got to go run and get it, and let's see, can they do that throughout this entire draft coming up?
B-Max over here talking about bargain deals, and he's got the best CBS jacket on there, rocking it, that he's been wearing in every single hit I have seen. Guys, it is going to be an interesting offseason for sure. We know you guys will keep a close eye on it as the offseason officially begins. It all starts with the upcoming NFL Scouting Combine. That kicks off next week. Franchise tag and transition tag conversations will also begin before free agency ramps up in March. And then, of course, the NFL Draft, where the Titans have the #1 overall pick. That comes April 24th to the 26th.
The #1 overall pick has been traded 13 times in the common draft era. The last time the Tennessee Titans had the first pick was in 2016, but they ended up trading that one to the Rams, who selected Jared Goff. So the Titans have not picked first overall since the franchise moved to Tennessee. So their predecessor, the Oilers, selected Earl Campbell in 1978 in the top overall slot. Now, no team has traded its first-round pick, so all 32 teams are slated to make a pick on day one of the NFL Draft. Looking at the order here, it's the Titans, as I mentioned, with that #1 overall pick, followed by Cleveland, the New York Giants, the Pats, the Jags rounding out the top 5. Then we're looking at the Raiders, the Jets, the Panthers, the Saints, and the Bears in the top 10. We're talking off-season needs in the NFL, and now we're focusing in on the AFC South. So we got our Super Bowl champ, Bryant McFadden, and CBS Sports writer John Breech joining us now to break it all down. And we're going to start with the Titans. So we got the #1 overall pick here. They have money to spend with $44 million in cap space. So, John, they need to figure out their quarterback situation. They need to shore up that O-line. Where do they go first?
Yeah, you know what, Jenny? First of all, I'm glad you mentioned that 1978 pick with Earl Campbell, because before that, they had a #1 pick in 1973, and they took John Matuszak, who played Sloth in the Goonies. Now, I do not think they are going to get Sloth from the Goonies this time around, but that's the question. The quarterback question is the first thing that Tennessee has to answer, and they have to get the answer before the start of the draft, because that is going to dictate everything they do in free agency, in the NFL Draft. Because if you decide you need a quarterback, which I feel like is probably the right move for Tennessee, then that's what you do. You go get Cam Ward, you go get Shedeur Sanders, you get the quarterback you're enamored with, and then you build the rest of the team through free agency. But if you decide, hey, look, we don't love either of these quarterbacks, we don't love the top quarterbacks at the draft, then you can trade away that #1 overall pick. And as you said, this team has a lot of holes on the roster right now, whether it's offensive tackle, they could use a pass rusher, a wide receiver, heck, they could even use new kickers. So if you trade that pick away, that helps you fill those holes. I think if I'm the Titans, I'm probably leaning quarterback in the draft, but this team has so many holes to fill, I don't think they can make a wrong decision here.
And Brian,
go for it, B-Mac.
What I was going to say, I agree with John. This is a quarterback-driven league, and if you look at the emotions that we saw with Brian Callahan and Will Levis, clearly he was a bit impatient with some of the decision-making ability coming from Will Levis. And we also have to remember, it wasn't like Will Levis was his draft pick. I mean, he inherited the quarterback situation there when he became the head coach for the Tennessee Titans. So it's not like he's vested into Will Levis. And I would think when you look at the two most valuable options at the quarterback spot at the #1 pick, when you look at Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, both guys have had better collegiate careers than the aforementioned Will Levis currently, who is the quarterback for the Tennessee Titans. So that is the biggest area of concern for the Tennessee Titans, is finding out what to do at the quarterback position. And I agree with you, John. And then you worry about everything else following that. But if you don't have a quarterback, you won't have any wins.
Kind of need a quarterback. It's very important. I was also talking with Pete Prisco yesterday, and he feels like every team also needs to fix their O-line this year. Another team that needs to work on that is the Colts. So, B-Mac, they also need some defensive help as well. They have $28.2 million in cap space this offseason. What do they address first?
Well, when you look at the Colts, it's about adding playmakers to their young quarterback in Anthony Richardson. In terms of reaching the level of expectations, he hasn't done so because of injuries or just inconsistent play. But the best way to make your young quarterback feel more comfortable is adding talent to his offense. And I think that is the best route to go because, yes, they have a lot of holes they need to fill as well. Not as many as the Tennessee Titans, but if you can add a piece or two to their offense to kind of help things for their young quarterback, I think he can become a better quarterback and a better leader for their team. So the offensive side of the football field is where I would go because they need to add talent to be able to get the best out of their young quarterback in Anthony Richardson.
The Colts have the number 14th pick in this draft. We're going to head to Jacksonville next. My UMass guy, Liam Cohen, ready to help turn this organization around. I have high hopes for the UMass love out there. Looking at the Colts, the Jags already took care of some notable players as well. They signed Trevor Lawrence, Josh Hines-Allen to extensions last offseason. They can use some youth in their secondary. John, what moves would you like to see them make?
Yeah, I think that focusing on the defense probably makes the most sense. But if you're Liam Cohen, you're probably going to dabble in some of the things you were successful in Tampa Bay. You look at what the Buccaneers did really well last season. You say, oh, look at that run game. The Bucs ranked 4th overall. How do I translate that to Jacksonville? Do I have the talent to run that type of offense in Jacksonville? And I think that for the most part they do. I don't know that Tank Bigsby can be as good as Bucky Irving, but if Cohen feels comfortable with the offense they have, because you look at, they have pass catchers, they have Brian Thomas Jr., they have Christian Kirk, they obviously Trevor Lawrence, Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne. So they do have some weapons. So I think if you're Jacksonville, the defense needs to be your focus going into free agency, going into the draft, and you kind of let Liam Cohen mold his way, and hopefully he can turn that offense around like he did with Tampa Bay last season.
Good plan over there. All right, B-Mac, the Houston Texans are roughly $100,000 over the salary cap right now. Franchise tag probably not making fiscal sense for them at this point, but they do have Stephon Diggs sitting there as a candidate. You got to imagine they're looking to take another step forward in 2025. What do they need to do?
Offensive line production was an issue for them. You talked about it leading into our segment. C.J. Stroud was the second most sacked quarterback in the National Football League. He was sacked 52 times. Number 1 was Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears, 68. If you do not protect your quarterback, good luck in seeing any consistent production coming from him. So finding a way to be better on the offensive line so he can be a better quarterback. Secondly, adding depth to the wide receiver position. You talked about the losses of Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. It was all about Nico Collins. They have to add more playmakers to that room because clearly We don't know the status health-wise of Tank Dell, where he will be in 2025, and the same can be said for Stephon Diggs, who's coming off a season-ending injury as well. So adding more depth to the pass-catching position could actually help C.J. Stroud get back to the rookie year numbers that he was able to provide when you look at the pass catchers that he can throw the football to, along with having sound protection coming from the offensive line unit.
Bryant, John Breech with the offseason needs for the AFC South. Fellas, thanks for your time here. You best believe we have you covered every step of the way as we gear up from NFL free agency, the combine, the draft, and more. Keep it locked right here on CBS Sports HQ for all of the latest.
Well, Sam Darnold had a career year with the Vikings, leading Minnesota to a 14-win season. He was top 5 in passing, more than 4,300 yards and 35 touchdowns. That's more touchdowns than his previous 4 seasons in the NFL combined. Now, last offseason, he signed a 1-year, $10 million deal. Now he can either get franchise tagged by the Vikings or hit free agency. Prisco has him at the very top of his top 100 free agents. The legal tampering period, by the way, begins March 10th. So tick-tock, we're getting close to that free agency frenzy in the NFL. CBS Sports NFL writers John Breech and Will Brinson are here with us to go through some of the big offseason needs for the NFC North. And we're going to start with Darnold and the Vikings. And why not? John, I'll start with you. What do they do with Darnold? What do they do with J.J. McCarthy here? They're expecting him to be back, but how do you say goodbye, if they even are, to a guy like Darnold who had a career year like the one he had in 2024?
Yeah, this is quite the dilemma the Vikings are in, because you don't want to just let him leave. He led you to a 14-3 record. The Vikings looked great. He had a career year, as you just mentioned. So I think if you're the Minnesota Vikings, you also don't want to sign him to any sort of long-term deal, because you do have J.J. McCarthy. And the advantage of having a QB on a rookie contract is that they are on a rookie contract. And so you waste that advantage if you sign Darnold to a long-term deal. So I think if you're Minnesota, your best option is probably hit him with the franchise tag. That gives you you're paying him a little over $40 million. Now you have a QB locked up for the 2025 season. Because keep in mind, you don't know what J.J. McCarthy is going to look like coming off a significant injury in his knee. So you do want to have that insurance there. I don't think it would hurt them too much to keep Darnold around for one more year. And guess what? If J.J. McCarthy looks good, maybe you trade Sam Darnold away. He doesn't have to stick around and play on that franchise tag. But I think having him in Minnesota for 1 year wouldn't be the worst thing for the Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this is, and I feel like this is going under the radar, J.J. McCarthy had a setback during the season on his injury as well. So you don't know for sure that he's going to be ready to go. You can't sign Sam Darnold to some $40 million contract, which is what the projected value of his deal is. And by the way, the Vikings quarterback on the top of Pete Prisco's free agent list, the last guy that was Kirk Cousins. So be careful, Sam Darnold. What happens to you in 2025? I think the move here, John's right, is one of two things. You either franchise tag Sam Darnold, you give him $42 million or whatever it ends up being, and then you have him for 1 year. It's another audition for him for free agency next year, where if he performs really well on that 1 year deal, he's definitely going to get paid. It's sort of like, all the questions about week 18 and then, of course, the playoff performances get thrown to the side if he comes out and plays well in Kevin O'Connell's offense again. Gives you a little insurance with McCarthy. If he comes in, he beats out Darnold for the job, great. You've got your future ready to go. And if Darnold, if this isn't going to work with Darnold with the franchise tag, then I don't know, go sign Aaron Rodgers in free agency and let him repeat the path of one Brett Favre.
Yeah, I was going to say it's going to be deja vu. But in this league where you're always trying to find the guy, I mean, you just have to wonder, did Sam Darnold just need a little extra seasoning? He's 27. He's still young. But yeah, they've got an interesting quarterback dilemma on their hands. Will, what do you think the Packers are going to do with Jair Alexander? Do you think Green Bay is going to cut bait with his 4-year contract?
I don't know that they're going to cut bait. We heard Josh Jacobs at the Super Bowl say they need a cornerback, they need a wide receiver 1, and they need a pass rusher. And he's not, it was kind of harsh words for the franchise, but he's not wrong. I mean, that's what they need. So I guess they could move on from Jair Alexander. They've had the issues with him, sort of not really like off the field, but just kind of like in the locker room, as well as some injury stuff. I think they probably try to ride it out if they can in order to maintain that talent level at cornerback. Go find someone else who can be a possible cornerback number one. If Alexander works out, I mean, certainly they could end up cutting him. But if they do keep him, you have a little insurance there at the position as well. I fully expect them, though, to address that position in a big way, even more so if they do end up cutting ties with Jair Alexander.
All right, we do have a new head coach in the division. Ben Johnson taken over in Chicago, the offensive genius that he is. He's now in charge with getting the most out of Caleb Williams. John, what are the Bears' biggest needs in Johnson's first year?
Well, I think no matter how good Ben Johnson is of a play caller, his offense is not going to work if the Bears don't get a better offensive line. So I think that has to be where Chicago starts. You look at what happened to Caleb Williams during the 2024 season. He got sacked 68 times. That was tied for the third most in NFL history. If your quarterback is getting sacked 68 times, you are not going to win very many games. So now, the good news for the Bears is they're going to have the opportunity to rebuild this offensive line, because you look at their interior guys like left guard Tevin Jenkins, Matt Pryor, the right guard, Coleman Shelton. All those guys are set to hit free agency. So Chicago can kind of start from scratch. Maybe Ben Johnson says, hey, let's go get Kevin Zeitler from Detroit. I liked having him at guard. So you have a chance to kind of rebuild that offensive line. And the other thing I think will be interesting with Ben Johnson is you looked at what he did on offense with the Lions. Well, he had Sonic and Knuckles there with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. So I won't be surprised if he looks to replicate that in Chicago, where he gets kind of that thunder lightning connection at running back. And then obviously the Bears have to figure out what they're going to do with Keenan Allen. Do you re-sign him? Do you let him walk? So they definitely have a lot of offensive questions they need to answer before Ben Johnson's going to be able to implement what he wants to do on offense.
Yeah, the offensive line is so key. I mean, we heard. That's when you knew Bill Belichick wasn't going to be involved in the Bears coaching search, was when he went on the Manning cast and dragged them for their, investing in the skill position guys and not putting the money in the offensive line. And when we talk about Detroit and how that offense operated under Ben Johnson, they had one of the best offensive lines in football for the last few years. It's easy or easier to have a great offense when you have a great offensive line. You look at the teams with the most offensive touchdowns here. Those teams, that Rams team, Orlando Pace, that team had a great offensive line. And those Broncos teams had, the Shanahan, or excuse me, not the Shanahan, but the Peyton Manning offenses had the good offensive lines as well. So you've got the Lions with a great offensive line. What do the Bears have? As John pointed out, you kind of have to rebuild a little bit when it comes to that Bears offensive line. I think that's something they really have to focus on this offseason. That's been an issue for Chicago for several years now. And when you have a young quarterback who's taking a ton of sacks behind a bad offensive line, it is going to wear on him and make it difficult for him to really blossom into what you want him to become. So I think first and foremost, you do want to try and get that offensive line. You do want to build that identity that you had in Detroit of this team that could run the football and then build off of that running game. I mean, that's what made that passing game so lethal for Ben Johnson, and his ability to do so many different things was the constant threat of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs breaking off long runs. So more than anything, the Bears have to make sure they focus on the offensive line this offseason.
Penny Sewells, they grow on trees, right? I mean, no big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Just go grab one.
Those guys are easy to find. All right, let's go back to Ben Johnson's old team, John. The Lions won the division despite all those injuries they had. Is it as simple as everyone coming back healthy, or do you expect them to reload on that side of the ball?
Well, I do think that getting guys back from injury will absolutely help. But when you look at what happened to the Lions down the stretch, you look at their final 6 games, including that playoff loss to the Commanders, they gave up 31 or more points in 4 of those 6 games. So it wasn't just injuries. It was just the wheels fell off the wagon on defense. And I really think that all started going back to Aiden Hutchinson's injury in October. The Lions just did not have any pass rush after Hutchinson went down. So I think one thing you need to do is kind of find that complementary pass rusher to go along with Aiden Hutchinson. Look, we've seen all this speculation about Myles Garrett going to Detroit. We saw him chatting up Jared Goff and Aiden Hutchinson at NFL honors. I'm sure they were recruiting him hard, because if you get Aiden Hutchinson and Myles Garrett on the same team, now you have the best pass rushing duo in the NFL. So you really do need that, because if there's another part where that defense struggled, it was in the secondary. This was a defense that gave up the 3rd most passing yards in the NFL last season. Their best corner was probably Carlton Davis. He's set to hit free agency. So now your secondary that already wasn't great could get worse. So you do have a lot of defensive questions that still need to be answered, despite the fact that you will be getting several guys back from those devastating injuries that the Lions dealt with during the regular season.
All right, John and Will, sit tight because we will talk about the other side of the North, the AFC North, when we come back. We do want to look at some key dates in the NFL coming up. The scouting combine starts this week. It's coming up, starts Monday. Then March 4th, franchise and transition tag deadline gets going March 10th through the 12th. That negotiating period, that legal tampering period, before that March 12th free agency begins officially at 4 Eastern. And then, of course, the NFL draft, which we're all waiting for to see what's going to happen at the top of that draft board. That's April 24th through the 26th. Let's take our talents to the AFC North, and we begin with the rocky relationship in Cleveland. Myles Garrett wants out. The Browns front office would rather go to couples counseling and work through their problems. Their big problem, though, is Myles wants to win. Doesn't think that'll happen in Cleveland. But with 14 sacks this season, he brought his streak of double-digit sack seasons to 7 straight. That sits 3rd behind Reggie White and John Randall all time. Again, that is an active streak. We're actively bringing back John Breech and Will Brinson to talk and take us through what's going on in the AFC North and their offseason needs. And John, I'll start with you. The Browns' offseason plans could completely change depending on what happens with Myles Garrett. So how do they even begin to assess what they need to do until they get clarity on that situation?
Yeah, this is interesting, Mike. Hit the nail on the head that Myles Garrett wants to leave because he wants to win now. So you cannot blame him for wanting to leave Cleveland because you look at where this team is. Well, they need a starting quarterback. That's unclear going into 2025. Their running back situation, Nick Chubb set to be a free agent. So that's also unclear. Guess what? The left tackle situation also a little bit unclear because Jedrick Wills is set to be a free agent. So you're looking at 3 key positions, and that's just on offense where it's just these giant question marks. I'm not sure how the front office can look Myles Garrett straight in the face and say, oh, yeah, we're going to be a Super Bowl contender next year. Well, you know what would take them a step closer to being a Super Bowl contender is trading Myles Garrett because you're going to get a huge return for a player of that caliber, and that's how you start to rebuild your roster. So I do think that even though the front office has been adamant that they don't want to trade Myles Garrett, this feels like the best move for Cleveland. That allows you to start your rebuild right away. You can fill in those other holes during the free agency, during the draft, and plus you'll have a little bit more money to play with on the salary cap once you trade away Myles Garrett. So I do think that probably makes the most sense for Cleveland right now.
Well, no matter what happens with Myles Garrett, I'm curious what they do in the draft because Cleveland is sitting at number 2. They could have a crack at either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. So do you think they'll be satisfied with either of those guys in the draft, or they look somewhere else with that pick, or do they take a free agent approach with that quarterback position?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're Cleveland, you probably need to do the sort of, I like to look at it maybe like Seattle did with Russell Wilson and Matt Flynn, where you take the sort of the 2-pronged approach. You sign somebody in free agency to try and make sure that you have a veteran there, and then that gives you the opportunity in the draft if you want to bring somebody in, for the purposes of getting the young player, because you don't know, you don't control your destiny at number 2. You have these guys, and look, by the way, I wouldn't rule out Jackson Dart either at 2. Jackson Dart is a guy that's going to be very well thought of when we get to the draft. I think he'll move up higher than most people. I think some folks would even say he might be the best quarterback in the class. I know that's surprising, but nevertheless, if you're Cleveland, I think you want to have a veteran there. You've seen that veterans can work in that Kevin Stefanski system, and at the same time, you want to have the opportunity to bring somebody in, but not have to force them out on the field. We've seen that jersey with the list of Cleveland quarterbacks. It keeps growing and growing and growing, even when they hit on like a guy who was decent in Baker Mayfield. So I think the smart move here to take the dual-prong approach, grab a veteran, and then also look to one of those top 3 guys in that draft class at number 2, knowing that even if you get traded, somebody trades up with Tennessee, or Tennessee takes a quarterback, you still have somebody available, and that gives you a little leeway on that front.
John, let's stay in the state of Ohio here with the Cincinnati Bengals. T. Higgins, number 2 free agent on Pete Prisco's top 100 list. Can the Bengals afford to pay both Higgins and give Jamar Chase the top dollar he's looking for?
Well, I better mention it now because if I don't know, Brinson will. We all know the Bengals have a reputation for being cheap and frugal and penny pinching. Well, guess what? I think Joe Burrow actually knows that because he's the guy going out there telling his grandpa to open up the checkbook. Let's sign everyone. There's a reason he went to Super Bowl week and did Radio Row, and every time he spoke, he was saying, we need to sign every single one of these guys, and I don't care how much money it costs. Well, I think the Bengals probably love to see that the salary cap is going to be going up so much in 2025. And I think when you look at what their strategy should be, it's probably going to happen. That is one, tag T. Higgins. You're only paying him a little bit over $26 million a year. So it doesn't matter if his asking price is $30 million a year because you have him at $26 million a year. That gives you a few months to try and work out a long-term deal. I think the Bengals will absolutely do that. So now you've got that situation dealt with. With Jamar Chase, wow, man, if they would have gotten a contract done last season, they could have saved millions. Now you have to deal with him coming off a Triple Crown season where his asking price is only going to go up. I think it's going to go up way past where Justin Jefferson is as the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. So I won't be surprised if Jamar Chase ends up with somewhere between $38 and $40 million per year when they maybe could have gotten him at 35 or 36 last year. So that's why you got to open up the pocketbook right now. Then obviously those are the two big ones. They've got a couple other question marks on offense. The offensive line, the interior offensive line are things they're going to have to get figured out. Cody Ford's going to be a free agent. Maybe Alex Kappa doesn't return. So they've got some decisions to make on the offensive line because we saw Joe Burrow get beat up once again, took the 4th most sacks in the NFL. So you got your receivers, your offensive line, but there are question marks, and the Bengals have the money to answer them. It's just a matter of whether they will use that money.
I have an idea if you're Joe Burrow, just to maybe help the situation. Sell the Batmobile and give that money to the Bengals so that, they can help pay these guys because you want them to stick around, throw some money in the pot. Well, sticking with Cincinnati, if not for that defense, they may have actually made a playoff run. Obviously, it was very close down the stretch. They bring back Al Golden to be their defensive coordinator. How do they revamp that side of the ball?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. My boy, shout out High Point, North Carolina, Jermaine Pratt, requested a trade and pretty soon after Lou Anarumo was let go and moved on. And I think that speaks maybe to how this defense feels about Lou Anarumo and him sort of being scapegoated as a result of injuries and the defense. Look, the defense was terrible last year, no doubt about it. It was the weakness of that team, and if it's better, they are probably a playoff team, as you point out, Mike. I don't know. Let's see. I'm curious to see how Al Golden looks in this role. Does anybody have more gimmicks than Al Golden? The dude wore a suit and a tie when he's at Miami, and then he's wearing like rec specs, at Notre Dame. I thought it was fascinating that he has to have a gimmick wherever he goes. So I'm curious to see if he coaches in like a Skyline T-shirt or something like that in Cincinnati. But yeah, I mean, there's nowhere to go but up. But I do worry how if maybe we're sort of underrating how good Lou Anarumo was for his entire tenure with the Bengals, save for last season, and just how quickly Al Golden will be able to improve that defense.
Well, you're like his agent with endorsement deals with the Skyline.
No, I'm making fun of him for sure.
Okay. Sure. I covered him down. I covered him down here when he was rocking the orange tie a lot and the long sleeve shirt. I don't know how he did it in the summer and fall when it's like 90 degrees here in Miami. John, the Steelers, where it's like never 90 degrees in Pittsburgh, like the Browns, looking for that quarterback of the future. Is Russell Wilson, Justin Fields an option at coming back here? Or like Cleveland, are they looking for someone new under center in 2025?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is going to be the 4th year since Ben Roethlisberger retired. And the Steelers could be staring at having their 4th straight different Week 1 quarterback. I mean, did everybody remember Mitchell Trubisky was their Week 1 starter in 2022? And so, look, when you're in a division with Lamar Jackson, with Joe Burrow, the quarterback decision is absolutely one you have to get right. And the Steelers just haven't been able to do that. So you look at Russell Wilson, you look at Justin Fields. Those are the two obvious candidates. I won't be surprised if one of those come back to Pittsburgh. But then you also have a few wild cards out there. Maybe Kirk Cousins when he gets cut by the Falcons, Aaron Rodgers, if Mike Tomlin, because he clearly likes having a veteran presence under center, which is why I think he was so adamant about sticking with Russell Wilson. But it isn't just the quarterback position that Steelers have to worry about. They still need some wide receiver depth behind George Pickens. They're letting Najee Harris hit free agency, so now you've got to find someone to pair with Jaylen Warren at running back, and then even there could be a couple holes on the offensive line. So quarterback is the gigantic question mark in Pittsburgh, but this team has question marks all over the offensive roster, so they've got a lot of work to do this offseason.
Well, let's go to Baltimore, where there's no question about who will be under center for the next decade there. Offensive tackle Ronnie Stanley is the number 5 free agent on Prisco's board. At 31, does Baltimore bring him back, or do they need to start looking elsewhere?
You know, I think you try to bring Stanley back if you can, because what we saw from that offensive line, remember, I mean, people kind of forget about it. That offensive line was terrible the first couple of weeks of 2024. They were the big question mark coming into the season. They moved on from some of the older guys, and they had these draft picks from the middle to later rounds that they'd sort of cultivated and allowed to develop into the starting offensive line. Well, a couple of weeks into the year, things started cooking for the Ravens, and that offensive line was fantastic. Obviously, Derrick Henry had the huge season. Lamar Jackson, right there for MVP, was the first team All-Pro, running the football really well. And so I think the continuity, if you can maintain that continuity in front of those two guys, it gives you such a leg up in the AFC. So I would vote on the side of bringing Stanley back, but I think you have to be a little cautious about the cost because of his age and because of his injury history. But I'd value that continuity, and I would expect that Baltimore does as well. Plus, if you're Ronnie Stanley, do you really want to go anywhere else and block for someone other than Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson? That seems about as fun as it can get.
Yeah, that's a pretty good gig. Again, the scouting combine is coming up this week. GMs and head coaches talk. We might get some answers to all these questions pretty soon in the next couple of days. But remember, keep it locked to CBS Sports HQ for all the NFL news and analysis throughout the offseason as we turn our attention to the combine, free agency, and, of course, April's draft.